obviously you recently published this book, Reinventing Jobs, again with
Thank
Robin.
you. Yes, thank you.
And for those that haven't read the book yet, you really should. It's a very good read, and it's an easy read as well, which is always nice. And for me, it provides almost a much needed and long awaited update to how we think about strategic workforce planning. I think it certainly leads the way into that. Can you walk through the 4-step framework, which is in the first part of the book? 'Cause it's pretty fascinating, and I think it follows on quite nicely from some of the stuff we've just talked about.
Well, thank you. That's very kind of you. And again, all due credit to my colleague, Robin J. Suthasan. I'm sure it's an easy read primarily because of his intellect and his perspective as someone who's working in the field. So the idea would be that we have systems that think about human workers, and we could say, well, let's expand that beyond just employing a human in a job. Let's think about human workers engaged in many different ways. That's lead the work.
Yeah.
As Robin and I were talking about lead the work and what our next book might be, we realized that automation had a great deal of similarity, that it also was a boundary breaking idea, that it also required disaggregating the work to see the patterns. So we began to play with that idea, and the result was this book. So you could think of it as now expanding the dashboard.
Yeah.
So we have a dashboard that was human workers in a job. Now we expand it to say deconstruct the work into tasks, and now we can think about tasks distributed to other humans that might engage with us in different ways. Well, it's not much of a click. It's a big deal, but conceptually you can say, well, wait a minute. I love the way you phrased it. I could think of automation as a part of my workforce, which is kind of the point of the book, is that automation can be thought of in a way as part of your talent pool. I'll be in the Center for Effective Organizations. One of our affiliates is named Sharna Wiblin, Australian. Sharna has done a great deal of research on call it the epistemology or language of how we think about talent. And she raised an interesting question, many of them, but one of them is, would you think of automation as part of your talent pool? Well, as we'll discuss tomorrow in the program, there are some very interesting examples where human beings really regard the automation they work with as a collaborator. And they describe it as a collaborator, and they think of it as part of the team. This full language expert that happens to be sitting in a computer like Alexa or Siri or something like that can answer my questions when I say, has anyone ever done this before? That can suggest options based on what it sees. All right, so now how do we create a framework to understand that? So it's in a way kind of 4 steps to understanding and coming up with solutions for automation. So the first step is, again, this is a theme I think that is going to be a big thing in HR, is to disaggregate the work. You simply cannot see the patterns if you think of automation replacing people in jobs. What we discovered was, and this is a fairly common understanding now, but at the time we wrote the book, we were just beginning. There was a great deal, of course, of attempts to analyze how many jobs will go away. And the researchers studying that realized that they couldn't answer the question at the job level. So they broke the jobs down into tasks. Now they could say 70% of the tasks that are part of this job are, let's say, easily automated, but 30% are not. So the real issue is that we don't end up with jobs going away. We end up with parts of jobs going away. And then you have a need for humans, but you only need them for whatever it might be, 30, 70% of the work they did before. So disaggregation, as courageous as it is, imagine now that you in HR are going to have to go to leaders and say, well, I know that your accounting was about how many humans we were going to give back.
Yeah.
And we're not going to give back any of them.
Particularly as some new tasks will be identified because of the technology,
Yes.
which might add to the 30%
Yes.
in the example you
That's
gave.
right. So it can range. Now we say, well, the worst case is we need humans, but the humans only have 30% of the work to do that they did before. And it's not quite an equation where we just, well, then let's get rid of 70% of the people, because we may need 100% of the people each doing 30%.
Yeah.
Now so what do we pay them? I mean, it just changes development, pay, everything. And of course, you're right. It could be that we have 30% old work, but we have a new 60% of new work. And the interesting thing is, it is not unusual for that new 60% to be so much more valuable because of automation.
Yeah.
that you actually could do better economically by just paying the same people more to do 90% of the work they did before, because it's so much more valuable. So we talk about generally the idea that once you deconstruct and see these tasks, you may indeed replace humans at the task level. You may augment them, meaning that they're pretty much doing the same thing, but we've made it more efficient, faster, etc. But sometimes you actually enhance or reinvent them. And humans are doing something that no human being could possibly do without automation. And that's when you get these really interesting win-wins, where you have terrific economic value because of automation. You can afford to pay the humans more because they're now have been reinvented to be doing something else. So deconstruct the work.
Yep.
Then the second one is back to some early writing that I did with Pete Ramstad about the nature of the payoff. So there are curves and everything, but basically let's think about 4 different kinds of things. One payoff is the automation will reduce mistakes. So the value is getting rid of accidents, mistakes, etc. That's one way of automating. Another way of automating is the differences in the way people perform don't produce a lot of difference in value. So you could think about there's many different performance levels, they all produce the same value. So we may make them more uniform. Another one is this idea of augmenting. There is an increase in performance for each value. As performance increases, value goes up. Maybe it's like a line, and we're going to move people along that line. And then at the very right, let's call it at the highest performance levels, you have these situations where the highest people are the creative ones, exponential value. And sometimes automation can take all of us ordinary humans, and it can make us into the most extraordinary version of workers. So take surgery. The best surgeons in the world have certain things that they do. Some of them are frankly avoiding mistakes. The best surgeon in the world will think of ideas, or they've read the literature so that they know what to do in a certain situation. With automation, AI can inform a surgeon about the best procedure. Now, we've taken all those surgeons that were frankly somewhat poorer performers because they'd never think of that, and we have made them all superhuman. So this happens in like
good benefit
oil,
there.
Yeah. So that for HR, this idea of, well, what is the payoff we're trying for? Is it reducing mistakes? Is it augmenting the human performance? Or is it some sort of exponential reinvention of the work where we make everyone a superhuman with this tool? Those are discussions that we need to have. Leaders need to be facile with that idea. Once you've done those 2 steps, then you can turn to more of the automation. So the next step would be to begin to, task by task, think about what sort of automation, robotic processes, artificial intelligence, deep learning, etc. So our feeling is that if you can get the tasks well isolated, then these questions of, well, should it be robotic, should it be artificial intelligence, machine learning, deep learning, etc., those are difficult questions at the job level, probably impossible.
Yeah.
At the task level, they become a bit more clearer. They're still tricky, but it also reflects the future of HR. That step must happen in conjunction with people who know technology well. What often happens is you have operations or IT over here. They're very good at understanding the different technologies. They're very good at speculating about how they might affect the work. You've got HR, which knows the work deeply, but isn't very facile or very involved with the technologies. And when they're separated, you get, if it's driven by technology, you'll get lots of rather naive solutions about the work, but very deep on the technology side. If it's HR, you get very deep understanding of the work and the workers, but maybe some naivete about technology. So again, we come back to that boundaryless HR function, where if you look around HR, it may look like a technology design organization in many parts of it. You might really not see a difference there. And then the final thing is, so you've done all this analysis at the task level, then you reinvent the job, which is the title of the book. And that's when you come back, you put it back together optimally, and you have the courage to say, if it turns out that we need only 50% of the work being done by people, we're prepared as an HR organization to help our leaders understand that and work with it for you.
In this series, we will be speaking to a range of senior leaders who are pushing a data-driven and digital HR agenda. Make sure that you subscribe via your podcast app of choice and also via our YouTube channel for free and regular interviews with the digital HR leaders of the future.